Where can you encourage the start doing behavior and make the stop doing behavior less effective? Business is messy and unpredictable.
Sometimes lonely.
So lonely.
So lonely.
And inspiration can often come from really weird places.
We pick up where the bullet point blogs and the highlight reels leave off.
We start with the stories.
So here's my story. I was doing what I do when I'm at my most productive, of course, which was scrolling my Facebook feed. And I came across this story that was posted by someone who said that she had trained her dogs, and she had a picture up there of 2 golden retrievers, trained her dogs to go and grab a pillow, a little pillow, every time a stranger came to the door. And so a stranger coming to the door would be greeted by these 2 golden retrievers, tails wagging, just holding these pillows. And I thought, well, that's kind of quirky. It's like one of those.
Is it like a party trick or like a?
Well, that's what I thought. I thought it was just
in case they want a nap when they get there.
Pet tricks or something, and kind of quirky. But then her explanation was this, because she's a dog trainer, and she said, my dogs would bark like crazy whenever anybody came to the door. And as a trainer, I know with animals, it's much easier to train them to do something than to train them to not do something. So I trained them to grab a pillow, which of course had the effect of stopping the barking, but it was much easier to train. And I thought, that's not just with animals.
Technically we are also animals.
Well,
so
correct,
maybe we're on the same person. It's not just with dogs.
I should say. But I thought, what I first thought was, I really want to talk to Jody about this, because I think there's a lot there that goes beyond just, hey, that's a stupid pet trick I can teach my dog.
Yeah.
And I was thinking back on the kind of the really successful longer term strategies that I employ with clients that actually take root. And a number of them have that kind of as at its base. So if I said to somebody, as I have, don't send these emails that you keep sending out on this project or this thing, they would come back and they'd say, yeah, I know you said not to do this, but I just X, Y, and Z, and I couldn't not do it. But when I started saying, there are 2 things I want you to do. The first thing is, I want you to go over your emails and I want you to eliminate the passive voice, because it's ambiguous. Not a report will be written, because that causes confusion with your people. Say, you will write a report. But so check everything for passive voice, and then talk to Joe, your vice president, or send it to me. If it's an important email, we'll go over. But those are the strategies, as I'm looking back on it, those are the strategies that actually took root. And that clients have told me, when you told me to do that, that actually worked. And what a number of them had in common is because I was telling them to do something.
Yeah. Because
my strategy or my recommendation of not to do something was just falling by the wayside.
So it's funny. It reminds me of, there's a great deal of wisdom that I've picked up from our beloved Christy Schmier over the years. But one of my favorites was when I was taking one of her nutrition cleanse classes, and someone was asking a question about, because that class worked as an elimination. So you slowly stopped eating certain things. And she was saying, like, I forget what it was, but I think it had something to do with carbs. Like I miss this, or like, what's something I could have that feels like this, and, like a substitute, like a faux substitute or something. And I don't remember any of the circumstances apparently. So this is a terrible story, but I remember her response, and it was pretty revelatory for me, which is, she said, I don't want you focusing on what you can't have and what you're eliminating. If you, trust me, if you focus on eating and drinking everything I'm saying to drink, which was eat and drink, which was actually a lot. It was like a certain amount of protein, a certain amount of fiber, a certain amount of vegetables. Like if you're putting in everything I'm telling you to put in, you tell me at the end of that if you're still hungry or wanting, because it was actually a lot of food. It was not a deprivation kind of thing. Yeah. And that really stuck with me. And I've used it years since then, like instead of thinking about what I can't have or like deprivation, I'm like, put in all the water I'm supposed to drink, all the fiber, all the protein, all the vegetables. And at the end of it, it eliminates the problem is what it is. I'm like, oh, I'm actually quite fine if I've put in all the things that I need. So,
well, and obviously, that nutrition and wellness is a particular strength of mine. So, because, I spent so much time as what I like to call a 7th level vegan, where I stopped eating anything that casts a shadow. But my point is that I read that, because I always got accustomed to having like dessert after dinner. And so one day I read, you know what? Don't have dessert. If you have to have something, have a banana with peanut butter, because a banana has potassium and it relaxes the muscles, and peanut butter and nut butters have like tryptophan or something like that, so they can make you drowsy. And doesn't have, unless you have one of the commercial brands of peanut butter with a lot of sugars,
sure,
doesn't have a lot of sugars and things like that do X, Y, and Z, and so you'll be able to sleep better. Now, I don't know whether all of that is true, but I do know that it was much easier for me to go from, or rather than stop eating this, to just go to well, here's a different habit. You can still do that. Much easier to do that.
Yeah.
And on the business side, those things, so I started thinking about the things that I want people to stop doing, and then try to redirect that into, okay, what's the different workflow which would have the effect of avoiding the kind of error or duplication that I want to avoid, while it's not a preclusion.
Yeah, and it's slightly trickier. Because it's one thing if we're talking about like on the nutrition side, you can have that wisdom, and I can do that for myself quite easily. Simply, maybe not easily, but it's a simple equation if we're talking about how you apply this kind of thought process to yourself. But I don't want to step over the part of, in the dog story, there was training. And while in a business setting, you don't literally, sit with a piece of cheese with somebody and teach them a thing in the way I think we think of it, you can't, what won't probably work is, whether I'm thinking about my kids or, in a business team setting, you can't just simply saying, do this instead won't magically make this thing work. No, like she didn't just say to the dogs, grab a pillow instead of barking.
Right. They're like,
so in a completely not patronizing or belittling way, I do think we have to pay attention to what is the train, like how do you train a human to do something, and the positive reinforcement, the encouragement, like whatever falls into place of how do you instigate a doing behavior instead of trying to stop a behavior, to put a stop to another behavior you want them to not do.
Right. And so there are two things. The first one is just
shot collar.
What was that?
I said shot collar. It's probably not appropriate, right?
No, I was thinking of Big Bang Theory when there was an episode where every time Kelly Cuoco's character would sit where Sheldon wanted her to sit, he would say, do you want a mint? Do you want a mint, or do you want a chocolate? And by the middle of the episode, Leonard was like, are you training my girlfriend? But anyways, it reminded me of you. And you said that.
Really funny. Would you like a cookie? Would you like a
really
cookie?
Funny episode. But yeah, so I think you're right. If you just say, do this instead, that's not necessarily going to get you there, and it's not a be all and end all. But if there's, earlier I mentioned workflow, well, we started to put into effect that started to resolve a problem that we've had here for years that I've been irritated about in terms of how data gets entered and all that stuff, was instead of saying you need to stop doing that. And even when I said I need you to start doing that, it didn't really take. But what's taken is when we actually built a process, we reimagined this entire process, in this case of opening a file or whatever, and built a workflow so that somebody could follow. It wasn't just a one step, stop doing this, start doing this, but it was this whole, it was almost like a merge lane It wasn't just a turn, an abrupt turn. It was this merge lane where you started doing other things and you got to where you wanted to go. Much better than if we just said, okay, instead of going straight, you have to go left now.
Right. It does remind me of a topic that comes up a lot, where I actually do talk about sometimes with people that at the end of the day, we're basically lab rats, right? Like if you push a lever and you get cheese, you're going to keep pushing that lever. If you push a lever and get shocked or just simply don't get cheese, you won't keep hitting that lever. And I think about that when folks talk about how many emails they get, or, just like how much communication and it's a careful thing, because I'm never suggesting that you leave people hanging or whatever, but it's more just being aware that in every interaction you have with someone, whether you realize it or not, you're training them how best to interact with you and how to get what they need from you. So if they shoot you an email and 30 seconds later you reply back with everything they need, on the one hand, that's great. You're being responsive. There's not necessarily an issue with that, but you are teaching them that that's a really fast, efficient way to get what they need from you. Versus, I mean, it's funny, I just had a sort of similar conversation with a client yesterday, a very new client. And I do encourage clients to reach out to me anytime they want, by phone, by text, by email, whatever. So I didn't want to stem the flow of the reaching out, but he was asking me a lot of nuanced questions. And because of my learning stuff, like I can reply back with a simple answer very quickly, or like there's certain circumstances where I can write my thoughts and they just flow out. There's also a giant bucket of things, of anything particularly nuanced, where I don't know what special kind of hell happens in my brain, but it's really hard for me to get my thoughts out. And these were nuanced questions. And so his emails were stacking up. And so and I think he was getting a little bit irritated. And so we had a conversation about that. I was like, look, if it's nuanced, we probably need to hop on a call. Like it'll just be faster that way. Or you can send me a thing, but then I'm probably just going to call you. And because that's going to be the fastest way to get a nuanced answer out of me versus something, like quick and simple. So thinking of, back to the point, like not imagining training as, do you want a Mint? Do you want a cookie? But just to notice that training is happening all the time. And can you encourage behavior that is the start doing? Where can you encourage the start doing behavior and make the stop doing behavior less effective? If the tapping on your shoulder is annoying you, try stopping responding to the tapping on the shoulder. Don't give the cheese there, and people will be less likely to be tapping that lever to get your cheese.
I think that's true, but I think what's really important is the conversation. When you were talking about that, you had to discuss it with your client. So if you're right that people can figure out certain things on their own. For example, I have no doubt that several years ago, a number of my clients figured out that I am much more responsive when they send me an email than when they leave me a voicemail. And for me, it's because I can see the emails in my inbox, but voicemails, there wasn't a real way. It didn't go to my email. So I'll listen to it, go, yeah, I have to get back to her. And then I didn't have a really good process at that time.
Interesting.
To put that in a task or whatever. But that's if it's clear cut. Hey, I sent an email, this happened. I left a voicemail, that happened. But sometimes it's like content marketing with email. Oh, did he respond quickly because my subject line was compelling? Was it because another thing with emails, similar to your nuanced, the client that kept asking nuanced questions. If I have an email and it's a 3 or 4 line email from a client, it's much easier to respond. If I see with the same question, an email that's got 17 paragraphs of context, I'll store that in my brain as, that needs block time. I'm going to have to do whatever. So they could my mistake has been in the past to hope that they figured that out, or even not taken notice myself. Maybe I didn't notice I wasn't getting back as promptly with voicemail as email. So if I wasn't conscious of it, whatever. But what you did with your client was you had, what I tend to call a care and feeding conversation, right? So this is how I work best. This is the care and feeding of me. If you need me, and so I've started doing that.
Yeah.
Voicemail is not great. If you text me, you're welcome to text me, but texts generally are better, like, hey, I'm going to be 10 minutes late for our call. But if you start texting me questions or things you want me to do,
right,
like voicemail, it doesn't necessarily have a natural funnel into my task list.
Yeah.
And so as a result, I may forget. And you're frustrated because you use the fastest method of communication and you heard crickets.
Yeah. And that's, I think, the really interesting thing is, prior to, if you take the metaphor of the original story, prior to all these discussions of how do you train the positive behavior to eliminate the behavior that you don't want, you have to recognize the structure. I don't even quite know what the word of it is, but it's the recognition of, like, this is a thing that isn't working for me, and I need it to work this. I would prefer it work this other way. So first you have to conceive of, in the story, it sounds so simple, but I think in all of our business versions, this is possibly the step that's missed more than even the how do you train. Is that recognition of, I would like this person to not bark at the door, whatever the business version of that is.
Yeah.
And then this is, I think, sometimes the hardest part. I would rather them, because there's a little bit of an art to what, I mean, you pointed this out. It's not inconsequential that the replacement behavior uses the dog's mouth. Because if it was just sitting, in theory, they could still be barking, or they'd be like fighting. So it's distracting, and it satisfies a certain thing. So I think that part, whatever that is, that, like, gosh, I don't like that people leave me voicemails. Well, you have to say, what would I prefer them do? And that is the part that I know I have fallen down with sometimes, whether it's in parenting or with an important relationship or any kind of work situation, is it's very easy to be aware of what you want people to not do. And I think you have a certain responsibility in that moment to at least help think about what you would prefer that they do. Like, what is their other, what is your preference? How can they check that box for you? It's to meet their unmet need, because you're always dealing with some kind of unmet need, whatever that behavior is. So when they have that need, what would you prefer that they do instead?
Well, and one of the tools that I found, it's not that I consciously employed this, it's that it hit me over the head, is I remember a conversation, it was a ways back, we were sitting around at one of our firm meetings, and somebody said, I've been waiting for you to get back to me. I can't do this because I've been waiting for you to get back to me with this. And Kim said, oh, well, how did you ask him? And so I thought,
I can't wait to hear this.
Please, or come in on bended knee. What are you saying? And so, but here was Kim's point. She said, did you just leave what you wanted him to look at on his desk? She goes, yeah, I left it right on his desk. And he goes, oh, he'll never respond to this. And they're having this conversation like I'm not there. And I was sitting there like 2 feet away. I'm like, I'm right here. That is
so. There's like Kim's personal pages in the Care and Feeding of Elliot Wagenheim.
Yes, that's my point, because Kim and I have worked together for 13 years.
Right.
And so sometimes if you have somebody who has worked closely with you, they're the best ones to say, oh, so yeah, he won't notice that, or it's over there and it becomes part of the white noise of his background. Here's what you have to do.
Well, isn't that interesting though? Because it's such, like, you unwittingly trained her and the word training, it always sounds like a little bit patronizing.
She had the wisdom to know this works, this doesn't work. And
but yes, she had the wisdom to notice it. But everything we've talked about thus far is, I don't want the dogs to bark at the door. Right. Like it comes like from an internal motivation of, I would like that thing to stop. In that story, there was no point at which, you didn't consciously say, I don't want people leaving things on my desk. But it is a way to show that, because she was pressing a lever and there was no cheese, if she just left things on your desk, she inherently learned that that is not a way to get the cheese that I am looking for. Yeah. And so, but this does get me the cheese. So it's a great text of like, it doesn't have to be this conscious, like complicated kind of thing. You are already always training people what works and what doesn't work. And
yes. And so I would say this, like when we hire somebody new, I would say, look, I can tell you how things work around here and all that stuff. But if you really want to find out, the best way to work with me, talk to Kim or talk to Lacey, because the people who know me well would go, okay, this works, this doesn't work, if this is what you want. And not because, and they also have to approach it with, they have to have your back. They can't be like, because he's a jerk, you really have to do this.
Yeah.
It's just, hey, this is the care and feeding. He's just not going to pay attention to this. Or if you really need this, then you might have to remind him to do that. And he's not going to take offense, but this is how it works.
I'm so sad and mildly terrified that this binder went away. I had a binder at one time in my office where the woman who was working for me, we made this like compendium, because to be that person, to be my assistant / helper, right-hand person or whatever, you need all my information. It's like, you have to have all my stuff. You have to be able to answer questions, to like fill things out and whatnot. So we created this binder that, frankly, when it went missing, I made a lot of jokes around it. I can't really even worry about identity theft. It's more like an identity gift, because it's literally like my entire world is packaged up in this thing. But in there, in addition to every personal detail I have,
nice.
There's
a book in there somewhere.
Oh my God. Still sometimes I break out in a sweat when I think about like, where is that binder? It hasn't come back to haunt me thus far, but any day now, you never know. But in there were all these pages of, we didn't call it the care and feeding of Jody Hume, but it was, I encouraged them to make their own notes about, and there were like 2 or 3 people's stuff in there. And my one person in particular, Yvonne, because it used to frustrate her. And so whenever you get frustrated and we work a thing out, add it to it, because I will frustrate the next person with whatever that thing is. And I can try and do things differently. But one of the things she added was, when Jody first starts talking, don't take notes right away. Because what she had stumbled on is like, I'm such a verbal processor that I will have a thought all worked out in my head. I will come in and be like, hey, I've got this idea. Let's start doing, and then I talk. And as I talk, because this is how my brain works, I cannot think a thing through in writing or even on a wall or whatever. I have to speak words to get to my final point.
I have to say one thing though, with the podcast.
Yeah.
It occurred to me that that's probably why we don't meet like at 8 o'clock in the morning. Okay, hit record, let's go. We have this wind up period, but also during our episodes, we tend to get like 10 minutes in, 15 minutes and go, oh, that's the point.
That's what we're exactly, because verbal processors have to like talk around a thing and then you like land in on the point. And that's what would happen. And she would get so frustrated because I would start talking and she'd be meticulously documenting everything I said. And then I would change half of it. And it's a really important point, because it flips this story all the way the other round. She wanted me to stop doing that. She's like, can't you just and we had a conversation about it. And I said, well, look, if I'm talking through a thing and like, I want to honor and limit your frustration. But if I stumble on a better way to do a thing, it's just not, there's no way my brain is going to be like, oh, let's ignore that better option because someone started writing already. Like, that's just an equation I can't handle. And so we did. So she goes, well, maybe I should just let you talk for a bit. And then I was like, yes, let's do that. Like, we'll talk. And then when I go, when I start going, that's probably where we're actually at like a real thing.
It kind of reminds me of the saying that I heard about movie making. This goes back to like early movies. And it was burn the first reel, so what they would say, because you did actual old fashioned film and it would be in these reels. And the expression arose out of the fact that a lot of times in movie making, they would start with such background and context and all this stuff, and they'd shoot that first reel, and then they get to the real story and what the movie is about. Right. And it became known to burn the first reel because you don't need that. That's just kind of the warm up part of it until that's kind of the processing. But what I really wanted to get to, and I know we have just a minute or two left, is you talked about the frustration. So in that binder, some people would weigh in, or with me, people would come up with their care and feeding tips. It's born out of frustration. And it occurs to me that that's really what entrepreneurship is to a large extent. You see what frustration is,
yeah.
And then you create an opportunity. But it's almost like being an internal entrepreneur in your own company. Look for the frustrations, and you can probably find an opportunity to change things for the better rather than continuing to buck that current that's swimming against you. By the way, I will ask you this question as we wrap up, and that is, if people have examples of this, where can they put them, Jody?
That's a very smooth transition, Elliot. Yes, it's very exciting that last week's episode, we kicked up a bunch of cool conversations about, so I'm very excited. If you have thoughts on this, we would love to hear them. One of the frustrations of podcasting is that we don't get to hear your thoughts unless you find your way to us in some way where we can hear those thoughts. So you can go to our website, sohere'smystory.com, and you can leave us a voice message, which we may actually even use on the show if you'd like. You can leave us a voice message. You can also hop into our Facebook group, which I believe there are links on our website, but you can also just search for So Here's My Story on Facebook, and there's a link right there that says visit the group. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. And while you're at it, if you're enjoying the show, tell a friend. We are actively growing our audience. And that is the only way we grow is when you share this show with a friend. And
right. So so what we're saying is we would tell you to just stop saying. You're trying to tie this in, aren't you? Yes. Stop staying silent. But now we're saying, instead of just stopping silence, go ahead. Why don't you go ahead and tell a friend or chime in on the Facebook group and join the conversation?
Sure. So, we'll have you cheese.
Right. There's
cheese in the Facebook group.
We might actually do a happy hour and give people cheese.
So that's our story.
But the discussion doesn't have to end here.
No, it does not.
In fact, we don't want it to.
No, we don't.
That is why we actually have our private Facebook group,
which we started to make sure that we could get your comments, your rants, your thoughts,
your stories. You can find links to that group as well as show notes and links to subscribe via email and how to find us just about anywhere you can possibly find podcasts at sohere'smystory.com.
And you can also find us on Facebook and Twitter at SHMS Podcast.
And since we know it takes a village.
Yes, it does.
We'd like to thank our village, our super talented, incredibly patient team.
And occasionally snarky team.
Yeah, but in the best of ways.
In the best
Lovingly
of ways.
Snarky.
Yes.
Good mockery.
So a huge shout out to the people who actually help us produce our show. First, our sound engineer, Tom Hansen.
Thanks to Christy Schmier for our brilliant show notes and all the other fantastic writing she does for us.
And to Taylor Mathauer for doing just a little bit of everything.
Including wrangling us.
Which
is no small feat.
No, it's not.
This is Jody Hume.
And I'm Elliot Wagenheim.
And you've been listening to So Here's My Story.